Hello team, my name's Ruth Jeans and I'm working with Dawn and Laura on the Skills for Life evaluation. I've obviously met Hannah, so we're familiar with each other, but Alana, I haven't had a chance to meet you yet properly, so hello and look forward to working with you over the next few years on this evaluation, so very exciting. So this video and resource is really to try and give you a little bit of guidance and help and support with some of the ethics and ethical issues of undertaking the evaluation. Now I should say now it's guidance. Ethics can be quite intimidating, it can be a bit of a worry. We absolutely don't want to put more pressure or stress on you, but just want to make sure that you have some awareness of some of the ethical issues that you might face, and just making sure that you're aware of the requirements by the Monash Ethics Committee on how to undertake the research and the sorts of things that we need to do to make sure that we comply with ethics appropriately in undertaking the research area. So I'll go through, and obviously any queries or questions, things you're not sure about, just get in contact with me and Dawn or Laura at any point, and we'll do our best to answer the queries. So hopefully by the end of the video, this is what we'd like to achieve. So we just want to familiarise you with some of the requirements for ethics from the Ethics Committee. Just make sure that you're clear on things like explanatory statements, which are documents that provide an overview of the research. Make sure that you're happy with what consent forms are and who needs to sign consent to be taking part in the research. One of the key issues, I guess, of this research project is that we will be doing some data collection with children and young people, and there's some different ethical issues that we need to consider there, so we'll just talk through that. And then finally, the sort of one of the unique aspects of this evaluation is obviously your involvement in it, so your dual role as Sport Taranaki staff members but also researchers on the evaluation. Now that dual role is fantastically helpful in many ways, in that you've got a good trusting relationship and a trusting rapport with the people that are going to be involved in the evaluation. But it just, because you don't sort of have that, it's not necessarily neutrality, but that step back that external researchers have, we just need to be a little bit careful sometimes in terms of what information we collect from research, and just making sure that we don't use that in your sort of professional context in a way that might compromise some of the ethics and ethical issues within the actual research process. So as I'll go on to talk about things like confidentiality, so information you've collected as a sort of researcher going into a site, the identity of the people who have provided that information should remain confidential in anything we present or report on from the evaluation. So just making sure that if we're talking about that data and that information we've collected in, say, like a team meeting or a staff meeting or with other sort of professionals in the sport area, that we don't, name teachers or name schools or name children that are involved in the research, because that will impact on our confidentiality requirements. But we'll try and raise these issues as they come through. We don't want to sort of sound like we're laying down the law or anything like that here. It's just hopefully to give you an awareness of what our requirements are. So just in terms of what we have permission to do, so we put in a big application to the Ethics Committee and we're just getting that finished off. We're hoping that's going to get signed off very shortly. But at the moment, if that all goes through, the Ethics Committee has given us permission to do all these different things here. So undertake interviews with principals and teachers, collect information via the session sheets that will be undertaken at each session, so the ones that the coaches or the facilitators will do to record information about what the focus of the session is, who's involved, their sort of thoughts and perceptions on how the session's going and what's been learnt in those sessions. We've also got permission to take notes, field notes, during observations of the Skills for Life session. conduct in focus groups to get information from young people and their parents, do interviews with Skills for Life coaches or facilitators, also interview you as staff involved in the programme, and interview relevant stakeholders in the local community. So what we don't have permission for at the moment, that's also going to be part of the evaluation, is the teacher online survey and the stakeholder online survey, and we basically need to put those together and have the list of questions before we can get ethics permission for them. So we're going to add those to the application shortly. All the information on things like our application form, all the explanatory statements and the consent forms are in our Dropbox folder that we've shared with you, and that's the sort of format that they're in. So go to resources, go to ethics, explanatory statements, and hopefully they should all be sitting there ready for your use. Okay, so to start off with, for explanatory statements and consent forms, so everyone that is invited to take part in the research needs to be provided with a statement that explains what the research is about. And you'll see in Dropbox we've tinkered with these slightly depending on who the person is that we're wanting to get involved in the research. So as you can see on the slide, the one there is for parents, we've got one for coaches, one for you as staff, one for teachers, one for principals, etc, etc. So everyone needs to have a copy of what the research is about so that they know what they're consenting for effectively, and just to make sure they're clear on what it involves, how long their commitment's going to be, what it entails, and also how their data is going to be treated, and what we're going to do with the data and how we intend on using it. Any person that we're wanting to take part as well also needs to have be provided with a consent form. So that's the actual form that once they've read the explanatory statement, they can go through the consent form and decide whether they want to consent to take part in the research or whether they want to consent to take part in aspects of the research. So the idea being that they complete that and then they return it to the research team. Again, all the copies of the explanatory statements and the consent forms are all available in the Dropbox folder. So in terms of what we'd like you to do with them, we're very much aware that this is one of these sort of necessary parts of research, and it's very important, to make sure that everyone is consenting fully and is fully aware of what they're getting involved in. But it can be a bit arduous, and we do really recognise that. So, we really super appreciate your help and support with getting the consent forms out and getting the explanatory statements sorted out. So in terms of the case study schools and individuals within the school, they have to consent to taking part to the research before we can actually do any sort of data collection. So it's quite a kind of priority task for us to get started quite soon, because obviously we can't do anything until we have these consent forms signed. So in terms of the schools, we'll start with them. So we're proposing, in terms of a process for how to get the explanatory statements and the consent form to the school, first of all, ideally if Ross could provide a covering letter to the school principal indicating that Sport Taranaki is supporting the evaluation and sort of a little bit about what it's about. We've got a template for this in the folder in Dropbox that Ross can use if he'd like to, and that letter should be sent to the principal together with the principal's explanatory statement and a consent form for the principal to be involved. The consent form for the principal allows us, once the principal signed it, will allow us to ask others in the school if they want to take part, and will also allow us to do an interview with the principal. So what we're suggesting is that the consent forms from the principals should be returned to you, because we think that's probably the easiest for the school to just hand that over, and then ideally posted back to us here so we can keep a copy of all the consent forms that are coming in and keep track of who's consented to what, rather than you having to do that, because it's quite an onerous task. This is very much up for discussion though, and we can discuss with you like whether this might be problematic or what might be a better way to do it. So it's absolutely not set in stone. So once we've got the principal agree, yeah, that's fine, then we can provide that principal with explanatory statements for the teachers that we want to work with, so the ones that are involved in the Skills for Life programme, and also consent forms for the teachers. So again, with that, if the principal's able to give them out to the relevant teachers, or you're able to give them out directly, that would be great. And then if they can return them to you to send to us. So that layer is probably the least complicated. Now the most complicated is the student consent, because this requires forms having to go home, explanatory statements having to go home. So once we've got the teachers on board, we really need to sort of ask the teacher if they can help us with this process. So they need to set aside sort of 10 minutes or so, I guess, in class time, if at all possible, to explain to the students about the evaluation and ask them if they could take home explanatory statements to their parents. So there's an explanatory statement for the student and there's also one for their parents. There's also a consent form for the students and a consent form for their parents. So we need both of those signing and returning to the class teacher. So if we could ask the class teacher to collate those, that would be fantastic, and just hold on to it for us. This will obviously require also a list of who is in the class for us to have, so that when we get the forms back we can check who's consented to what. Now one of the issues here is we're asking for young people, we're asking them to consent, or their parents to consent them to a number of different research processes. So some might take part in the focus groups, and some might be involved in observations of the Skills for Life classes, and we need parents to say that's okay, they're all right with us observing their child's class. So we might have a bit of an issue if we get quite a lot of children who don't consent to be observed within the one class, because that's going to sort of hamper our ability to observe effectively, because we can't write any notes about what those children are doing. So if that happens, we'll deal with it, we'll flag it up, and we'll have a discussion about whether we need to maybe change classes or what we do for that school. But generally, if we have, say, one or two kids in the class whose parents don't want them being observed, then we just need to make sure any observations we're doing, anything that child does, we cannot make any notes on, but we can make notes on the broader sort of activities that are happening and any other things that children are doing within that setting that have consented to being observed. So hopefully it is arduous, and particularly whilst you're trying to get the student ones, it can be a little tricky up front, but generally we do manage it, and particularly if we've got teacher buy-in, it's not too much of a task. If they're willing to remind students and keep saying, have you got your consent forms in, have you got them back yet, then we can get through this fairly easily. So the coaches and community stakeholders is a little bit easier. With the community stakeholders, again, if Ross could make that initial contact, just to be that bridge in terms of not these people out of the blue sort of contacting them who they've never heard of before, it just allows the research team to be legitimised here. And obviously with the community stakeholders, we need to collectively discuss at some stage who we should be approaching in each case study area. So again, if Ross could send out that template letter with an explanatory statement and with a consent form, and we'll probably look to just have the stakeholders to return the consent form to us. So we need to look into prepaid mailing options, and we'll probably chat with you about that at some stage as well. The coaches one, so it's the coaches facilitators working in the case study schools, and again, ideally if you could just provide them with the explanatory statements and consent forms, and then if they can return those to you for mailing back to us, and again we can keep track of who's consented. So just how we'll keep track of it, once we're getting the forms coming in and being sent to us, then we'll compile an Excel spreadsheet and just make it very clear who's consented to what, from what school and what area. So hopefully you've got an easy thing to check who we're able to get started with in terms of data collection and who's involved, and particularly which young people have consented to what. So you've got a clear idea before you go in the school. If you should undertake data collection with a child that hasn't consented and sort of realises at a later stage, don't worry too much about that. The key thing is we can't use that data, so we need to destroy that data and just alert the class teacher that that has happened, and they can, if they choose to, notify the parent in that situation. But yeah, if that should happen and you're concerned, just please contact us and we'll provide you with more detailed guidance there. Okay, so once we've got the consent form, that's fantastic. We can then start doing our interviews and our focus groups. Key thing before actually collecting any data though, is to just reiterate some of the key points from the explanatory statement. So before doing any interviews, doing any focus groups, just need to stress that what the research is for, who's going to have access to the data, which is basically in its raw form is just the research team. It's just us going to be going through it. And then also a key part of what they're consenting to is that they're allowed to withdraw at any point. So if they get halfway through the interview and think they don't want to do it anymore, you need to stress that it's okay for them to just walk away. There's not going to be any negative impact on that. And then the other key issue to stress before you collect any sort of interview or focus group data is that of confidentiality. So within all of our research, and what we've got agreement for the ethics committee for, is that we won't name anyone involved in the research or describe them or discuss them in a way that is easily identifiable in any outputs of the research. So we'll need to refer, and this goes sort of right down to things like the school name as well. So we can't name the school, we can't name the principals in anything that's written. So we'll use pseudonyms to cover case study areas, to cover case study schools, and you just need to reassure people that that's the case. So what they're saying is that they're not going to be identified through it. So if they want to sort of raise issues or raise a critique, then it shouldn't come back to them, which is why we guarantee or try to guarantee confidentiality as far as we can. There are some situations where it's very hard to disguise something that has come from a particular person, so we can't absolutely guarantee confidentiality, but the thing to stress is that we'll do our best to do so. And I guess here is where, as I mentioned earlier, some of the tensions might lie with being staff members of Sport Taranaki and doing the data collection. So I guess the important thing here is to stress that although you have this other role, in the role of data collection, you are a researcher first and foremost. So that confidentiality is okay, and it's not going to impact things they say, and not going to impact on negatively on your relationship with the person that said it. So I'm just thinking the obvious one is if anyone is particularly critical of the Skills for Life programme. Now, being open and upfront about that with you as the staff members and the team responsible for overseeing that might be quite difficult for the person to do, to say that to you, and also you might not be too happy to hear that particularly. So it's just that possible tension that could arise, just being aware of that, and I guess reassuring the participant that, look, I do have this other hat where I'm a Sport Taranaki staff member, but in this setting, that's hat's come off, I'm a researcher, and basically for the good of the evaluation we need you to be open and honest, and if there's not going to be any negative consequences if you share your honest views with us. So if you tell us that the program just isn't working for you and is not very effective, then that's not going to affect how we deal with you, or that we won't want to deal with you in the future because you've criticised us effectively. So I guess it's just being aware of that and recognising there might be a bit of tension there, and hopefully just being prepared to sort of work through this. So all those issues about the right to withdraw and confidentiality are heightened when we're working with young people who might feel that they have to take part. So it's particularly important, if we're doing focus groups with them, is to stress that that's not the case. And I should probably stress as well from our side at this point as well, although you'll be sort of undertaking getting the explanatory statements out and the consent forms on your own, and the session sheets and some of the observations you'll probably be doing before we have a chance to meet, Dawn and I are hoping to do a visit towards the end of the first lot of case study schools sessions. And during that case study visit, we're really keen to visit the schools, do interviews with the teachers and the principals, and do focus groups with young people and work alongside you on that. So for the first few, hopefully you'll have some guidance, you'll have us there, and we can go through it together before you kind of branch off on your own and do them on your own, to sort of help with feeling comfortable and feeling okay with what's sort of expected from those data collection methods. We know that obviously you're very experienced at getting data and getting information and do it as a day-to-day part of your role, but that's brilliant, and if you're happy doing it, that's absolutely fantastic. But we're not just abandoning you here. We will be here to offer support and to help if that's required. So just going back to the young people, so some of the differences that might happen when we're working with young people. This issue of young people feeling they have to take part, so just reassuring them that's it's not the case. You can walk away. It's not going to impact on your schoolwork. It's not going to impact on your involvement in the skills for life. The confidentiality aspect, they sometimes don't actually understand what that means, so it's just breaking it down and making sure you're clear on in simple terms. So your identity won't be known, so that means your name won't appear in anything we write or talk about from the research. It's not likely to happen, but just in case you do have any incidents where you're in focus groups and children start getting upset or they start disclosing sensitive material to you, it's obviously fine in that situation. If you've got a child upset, just stop the focus group and grab the class teacher and just notify them of either what's been said, what the incident was, what the issue is, and then in doing that you kind of hand over responsibility for the teacher to deal with that. If you have any incidents with any of the research where you feel uncomfortable or unsure about any sort of issue that's arisen, please just get in touch with us, and we can offer advice on how to deal with that and how to work with that. Equally, if anyone sort of gets upset about the research process or starts saying that they're not happy with how the research is undertaken, which is very, very unlikely to happen. I don't think I've been doing research now for well over a decade, and I don't think I've ever had this happen to me. But just in case, in that situation, Dawn is the person to refer them back to as the chief investigator of the project, and they can also be referred back to the Monash Research Ethics Committee as well. So just get in touch with us, anything like that. I'd say I very much doubt it'll happen, but just to cover that base. Just in terms again of your own sort of position as a researcher, if you are doing focus groups with young people, it's often best not to do it in a space on your own, particularly not in an enclosed space. So if a teacher is able to be present while you're doing the focus group, that's fantastic, but often I've found that's just not possible because they're dealing with the class and you're taking a group of kids out during class time. So if it isn't possible, I often will just ask to be in, say, an open space where people are walking by and they can see the focus group taking place and can see it all happening. So there's just, we're not sort of shut away. And that's just to prevent any sort of issues arising about what happened in the focus group, and just keeps it so that, people are seeing what's going on and can see for themselves what's happening. So again, not a major issue, but just something to be aware of and to think of. Okay, so I think that's pretty much everything from our end. If you're not sure about anything I've said here, obviously please get in touch, and I'm sure there's other questions that you will have. Very much, as I say, very much looking forward to working with you on this project and taking things forward. So and yeah, ethics is sort of just one of those hurdles we've got to get past. So I'm sure we'll manage it and crack on and have the consent forms back and be able to get on with the research process. So really looking forward to working with you, and I'll speak to you soon.